Good evening and welcome to tonight's free-range conversation with American Farmland Trust. My name's John Piotti. I'm the president of AFT, and I'm here tonight with Michelle Perez, another one of AFT's incredibly talented program directors. We're going to begin in just a moment. We're excited to have you join us tonight. Before we begin, a few quick points. Right now, we are dialing out to thousands of AFT members across the country. So just stay on the line and we'll be diving into our conversation very soon. Also, as with all of these calls, AFT staff will be live tweeting this free-range conversation with the hashtag FreeRangeAFT. So do that on Twitter if you'd like. Use that hashtag during the call to ask us a question or just to share your thoughts. Now, this conversation is all about you, the supporters and advocates who help keep AFT strong. So if you'd like to ask a question of Michelle or me at any point during this event, all you have to do is press 0. That's press 0 at any time. You'll be connected with one of our helpful staff members who will put you in the queue. If you've just joined us, good evening and welcome to tonight's free-range conversation with American Farmland Trust. I'm John Piotti, AFT's president, and I'm here tonight with Michelle Perez, the director of AFT's Water Initiative. We'll begin in just a moment. For those of you who have been on these calls before, you know the drill. We're excited to have you tonight, but right now we're still dialing out to thousands of members across the country. So you just have to stay on the line for another minute, and we're going to begin the conversation soon. And if you'd like to ask a question of Michelle or me at any point during this call, just press 0. And you can also use the hashtag FreeRangeAFT at any point on Twitter to ask us another question or to share your thoughts. All right, we seem to have many people now on the line according to the computer screen here, so we're going to dive in. Now, we've been doing these free-range conversations every 4 months or so now for 2.5 years, and we found them to be fun and informative. Now, in our last call, I had Dr. Jennifer Moore-Casera, who directs AFT's Climate Initiative and is a widely recognized expert on soil health. And tonight, I have Dr. Michelle Perez, who directs AFT's Water Initiative and is widely recognized expert on all things regarding water quality and agriculture. Great to have you here tonight, Michelle.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone.
Now, before I begin, just a quick comment on the date. As all of you know, it's September 11th, and I can't in any way come close to addressing the enormity of that day. So let me just say that I am, like I'm sure all of you are, thinking of those who lost their lives, those who were there to help, and those who keep this country free and safe. Tonight, we're going to be talking about water quality issues, runoff, soil erosion, what farmers are doing well, where improvements are still needed, and so much more. Now, AFT has had a focus on environmentally sound farming practices for 4 decades. And there are many benefits to following practices that reduce erosion and build soil health. And one of those benefits is that doing so reduces harmful runoff of nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, which we need in the soil to grow our food, but we don't need or want in our rivers or streams. So, Michelle, talk to me about how these issues are interconnected with farming and what you do as the director of AFT's Water Initiative.
Thank you, John. Well, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that food production is vital to sustaining human life. But water pollution is unfortunately an unintended consequence of that farm production. You know, EPA estimates that more than 70% of all Americans live within 2 miles of a polluted lake, river, stream, or coastal area. And of course, there are many sources of water pollution, like wastewater treatment plants, urban and suburban runoff, but agriculture is among the largest sources of pollution to many important water bodies, like the Gulf of Mexico, the Chesapeake Bay, the Great Lakes, and the Puget Sound. So as the director of the Water Initiative for American Farmland Trust, I get to do a lot of cool things and work at local, state, and federal scales. I'll tell you about 4 of them. I get to help the AFT regional staff in designing watershed projects and setting water quality goals and measuring progress towards those goals. I get to collaborate with the AFT experts in these regional offices as they assist farmers in adopting soil health practices that reduce water pollution by increasing soil health. And I'm talking about the soil health practices like no-till, cover crops, nutrient management, and conservation crop rotation. And third and fourth, I get to conduct research to share our field scale and watershed scale findings with other groups out there trying to clean up and protect our water bodies. And finally, I get to partner with our incredible federal policy team to improve the effectiveness of our federal conservation programs that, with the listeners' support, their taxpayer dollars, are providing the financial and technical assistance that farmers often need to help to adopt these soil health practices.
Wow, sounds like a great job.
It is a good
All
job.
right, I'm glad to hear that. Happy employees. That's good. Now, remember, if you have a question for Michelle, you can push 0 on your phone at any time, and a member of AFT staff will get you in the queue. And you can also tweet us at #FreeRangeAFT at any time during the call. And we're going to wait as a few questions come in. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask another myself. Now, you just mentioned, Michelle, the Gulf of Mexico. And a lot of people, when they think about farming and water quality, may not think about that. But the negative impacts are pretty pronounced. Everything that flows into the Ohio or Mississippi River ends up in the Gulf. And we have a large and expanding dead zone in the Gulf. So maybe you can talk a little bit about this dead zone, what it is, what causes it, what can be done to help, and maybe more specifically, some of this work that AFT is doing to try to shrink it.
Absolutely. So for the listeners that don't know, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is this huge area of water off the coast of Louisiana that sometimes ranges in size from New Jersey to Massachusetts. It is so big. And every year it forms because of nutrient and sediment runoff from farm fields, livestock operations, cities, and suburbs. And a chemical process happens in the water wherein the water is robbed of oxygen. So bottom-dwelling creatures like mussels, shrimps, and crabs, and slow-moving fish, they suffocate. That's why we call it a dead zone. Over 70% of the nitrogen and the phosphorus pollution causing the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, unfortunately, does come from agriculture, mostly from crop fields. And so AFT is addressing this challenge by promoting soil health practices and, where necessary, structural practices at the edge of fields and working at several different scales I mentioned earlier. So, for example, we conduct education and outreach. The staff in the regional offices organize field days with farmers. They organize learning circles with women non-operator landowners who are very much part of the solutions. We strive to geographically target those federal conservation programs to the best locations with the highest disproportionate losses, so we can use taxpayer dollars as efficiently as possible, because there's not enough that goes around. Because there's not enough that goes around, we look to other partners like the ag retailers in the private sectors. Those are fertilizer dealers, cover crop seed providers, no-till equipment providers, and we work with them and build up their capacity to deliver conservation technical assistance as well. I mentioned we work at watershed scale projects with lots of partners, and we conduct research. And one of the neat things happening right now is we're trying to work at linking conservation to risk management and getting federal conservation crop insurance discounted if farmers adopt cover crops, because we see that as a risk mitigating practice. So we work at so many different scales, we work so many different ways to try to address very, very tough, complicated problems like the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico.
It's interesting. You mentioned a couple of AFT's other programs. You alluded to our Women for the Land initiative, where we work with both women farmers and women landowners, often non-operating landowners, folks who are overseeing farmers who lease their land, and we're helping them adopt better conservation practices. And you mentioned some of our policy work. So your initiative and what you're doing it's cross-cutting, isn't it? It sort of connects with other things within the organization. Yeah.
That's right. I learned from my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
We don't work in silos. We're constantly in contact with each other. And if something is going well in one arena of our institution, we try to adopt it and apply it in other areas. Sometimes we throw the sink at these problems.
Well, I want to get to our questions really soon that are coming in. But one last one for me. I want to just tout something that's happened recently, because it's something that we're proud of here. Michelle, you and your team just released a number of case studies showing the economic benefits that flow back to farmers who are using better farming practices. And this got a lot of play. I mean, the social media world was lighting up. It's great to see that happen with agricultural stuff.
Indeed.
So tell us a bit about that, both that experience and a little bit about the research and what you found.
Yeah, it was very exciting. We were fortunate to win a highly competitive grant from USDA to try to address a dearth of economic evidence that these soil health practices do provide the economic benefits everyone talks about. So we said, this won't stand. We all tell the anecdotes and the stories that soil health practices can improve productivity, increase profitability, and be helpful for water quality and addressing climate change. But there just wasn't, studies you could really point to that said how helpful was it?
Right.
So we set out with these teams of staff in the regional offices in California, Illinois, Ohio, and New York to find what we called soil health successful farmers, farmers who have adopted for 4 or more years one or more soil health practice. And we found amazing things. Across 4 farmers, we saw increased crop yields averaging 12%, ranging from 2 to 22%. And these are corn soybean farmers in Illinois and Ohio, an almond grower in California, as well as a diversified crop rotation farmer in New York. We saw these farmers told us, and we crunched the data and we came up with calculators to do this, that 3 crop farmers saw an average increase in net income of $42 per year, and the almond growers' net income increased on average $657 per acre per year. So this was the proof we needed to show that there is tremendous return on investment that can be had if you implement these practices right. And speaking of ROI, the 4 farmers average 176% return on their investment in these soil health practices. So we were thrilled that NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, it's the part of the USDA that gave us this grant, was so pleased with these results that they agreed to put their motto, their logo, on these case studies with us. So they co-branded them with us, and they put them on their website. So not only you can find these case studies on AFT's website, you can find it on your USDA's NRCS website.
And we had an email that went out that was I think a lot of people picked up with a link to our website. And in a minute we're gonna let people who might not have seen that have a chance to see it. But I just want to put a point on everything that you've said here. So I just want to make sure the audience understands what Michelle is saying. And AFT has been in this space for 30 plus years of helping advance better farming practices. And we've often made the case that doing so is not only good for the planet, but it's also potentially good for the bottom line of the farmer. And at different times, we've been able to show that. But this is our most recent example, and I would argue one of our more sophisticated analyses that really used all the tools that are out there now. And as you heard Michelle say, it's significant. Farmers, this is a way to meet that double bottom line that we all want. It's a way to do what's right by the planet and at the same time help farmers be more successful. Very significant work, and we applaud you for it.
Thank you.
No, I was saying that some of you may have been on our email list and received notice about that case study. But if not, and you would like to receive a copy, we can make that happen right now through the powers of technology. So here is a quick single question poll. On your phone, that was the word phone. I didn't say it too well. On your phone, press 1 if you've seen this information. We'd like to know who out there has seen it. And press 2 if you have not seen it and you would like to have an email sent to you with a link to it. and then press 3 if you haven't seen it, but it's really not your thing and you don't care. So again, 1, if you've already seen it, 2, if you haven't and would like us to send you an email, and 3, if this ain't your thing. So that's our first polling question. We'll probably have a few later. We'll be sending emails out. They won't be immediate. We got to compile this, but we will get out to all of you who have asked and get you a copy. Now let's turn to our evening's first question from the listening audience, and I'm going to go over and see what we got. Looks like we have Gordon from Connecticut. Gordon, what's your question?
Good evening. Gordon Gibson here from Connecticut. We're a small state.
I think we lost you, Gordon. We're still on, though, right? Okay, we lost Gordon. Well, so much for the powers of technology. Maybe he'll call back, and we'll try to get you if you did. Let's see. I'm going to turn. We had a number of questions that were sent in earlier, and I always like to respect people who do their homework, so we're going to turn to one of them. It was a question from a Buzz C, and his question was, what is land conservation's role in AFT's water initiative?
Great. Well, Buzz, thanks for the question, and I guess I can interpret it a couple of ways. Land conservation, I wonder if you mean, farmland protection, or you mean conservation practices. So in AFT's water initiative, we focus primarily, most of the offices do, on the farm conservation practice end of the scale here, but in our California office, they've done an amazing job at linking farmland protection to water quality and climate benefits. And I'm just going to read off a factoid from their findings. The San Joaquin Valley Land and Water Strategy found that high-quality agricultural land, especially with low water stress, and so that's some of the most productive and free of environmental constraints, is at greater risk of development than any other land. So through research, through policy analysis, and through advocacy, AFT is working to tie together farmland protection with our water-oriented goals. I've talked a lot tonight about the link that we try to make to soil health as a water protection solution, and we try to, show that that is definitely important for farmer viability. So adopting in-field conservation practices not only benefits all of us as society and our water, but also benefits the farmer economically.
Great. And you can tell that when we get advanced questions, that gives Michelle a chance to do a little homework, and that's good because you get more thorough answers that way. We're going to turn to another question. Devona, I don't know where you're from, but you're on our queue here. Are you on the line, Devona?
Hi, I am.
Where are you from?
I am in Montana. I'm actually from Maryland,
okay.
but I'm in Montana. So my question is, Michelle, you mentioned cover cropping, and I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about how AFT is working with farmers on cover cropping, especially with regards to no chemical use and cover crops and no-till.
Great question. Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, cover crops are one of the critical components of a soil health management system for farmers to use in both cropland systems as well as orchard systems or fruit systems, as we featured in our California almond grower case study. And we do feature this cover crop usage in our corn soybean rotations in Illinois and Ohio, as well as the diversified crop rotation in New York. So what cover crops do is they provide a living root that keeps the soil in place over winter and, really helps provide, in a lot of cases, nutrients back to the soil, because many cover crops are legume-based and they harvest nitrogen out of the atmosphere and provide that to the next crop. Cover crops can be a concern in the sense that farmers sometimes are worried about being able to get back into the field in the spring and get the cover crop out of his or her way to plant the main commodity crop. One thing that was really neat about our Ohio case study was this emerging practice called planting green, wherein a farmer does not burn down the cover crop, does not use herbicides to do that, but plants directly into the cover crop. And through good old-fashioned, technology and know-how, farmers are developing their own crimping implements to lay down the cover crop and crimp it so that it doesn't get in the way of the commodity crop. So it's a wonderful emerging technology to continually develop solutions that meet the farmers' needs. They're finding solutions on their own as in partnership with extension scientists and federal agency scientists.
Now, Davina, she specifically talked about no-till, and I think I know what was driving the question. And I'm not an expert in this, but I want to flag this issue, talk about it a certain way, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's a whole range of different tools out there, and there's not a silver bullet. There's not one thing that does it. And in fact, what we find is often when you stack different practices, that's when you really get the most value. But one of the concerns a lot of people have about no-till is a way of helping build soil health. But the strategy that has often been used in the past is when you then want to plant a crop, you use, as you said, a herbicide. So you might be getting some environmental benefit, but you might be increasing your use of herbicides. And the beauty of what we're seeing happen now is more and more we're seeing farmers adopt other practices that still stick with no-till but are not using herbicides. That's correct, right?
Yep. And it's the no-till as paired with cover crops, paired with nutrient management, and paired with conservation crop rotation, which is if you're growing corn after corn after corn, please try to grow corn soybeans.
Right.
And if you're growing corn soybeans successfully, let's figure out if you can incorporate perhaps a wheat into that rotation.
Yeah.
So all those are the four main what we call soil health practices, what my colleagues in the Midwest call conservation cropping system practices, and emerging, we constantly coming up with the latest and greatest term. Regenerative agriculture is another term of it. And lo and behold, I think, my colleague Jen Moore-Cusero on the climate call mentioned climate smart agriculture. So it's wonderful that we have solutions that address multiple problems and can provide economic benefits to farmers.
Yeah. Well said. And I love that example of if you're a farmer planting corn, try something else. If you're already corn, soy, still try something else. That really fits with how AFT has always viewed the need for farmers to adopt more environmentally sound practices. Farms of all sizes and all types can take steps to do better by the environment.
That's true.
Yeah, great. All right, we got another call. We have Joan from New York. Hi, Joan.
Hi, yes, it's Joan Hutchins from the Hudson Valley.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm looking at my farm. I'm just sitting outside with the full moon and our cattle, Angus cattle, and I've got the corn crop right next to me. And we've got about 200 or 300 acres here, and an early member of the AFT with Peggy Rockefeller. But Michelle, I have to compliment you on your presentation. It's just excellent. So it raised the question in my mind how much you work, and I hope you do a lot, with universities that are ag-oriented, Cornell, of course, here. Also, when you mentioned your cases that had been signed on to by USDA, of course, I had to think of Harvard Business School, and they do have an agriculture courses there, and they use the case method. And, of course, UC Davis, I spend part of my time out in California as well, where we have orange groves. So my question really is academic, except I want to say one more thing on your rotation on corn crops, if you've got animals. Alfalfa, for people listening, corn with alfalfa Timothy hay. The alfalfa does fix the nitrogen, and I think we use I'm not sure we add too much. Anyway, that's just one comment. But please, I'm curious about your working with academic institutes across the country.
Thank you, Joan. That's such nice, kind words. Thank you for it. Yes, and alfalfa, we do feature that in the New York-based case study, Joan. I hope you do take a look at that one, as alfalfa was in the rotation for the farmer in New York, along with corn silage, corn for grain, or sweet corn perhaps, and soybeans. So that farmer and a lot of other farmers in New York are certainly taking advantage of the conservation crop rotation aspect of the soil health system. We partner every single one of our AFT staff that works with farmers, I am sure, in some way, shape, or form, benefits from partnership with the local land-grant university. They bring them out to our field days to serve as speakers. We read their research reports. They read ours. We ask them to serve on panels. They ask us to serve on panels. I think we have a terrific relationship with our land-grant universities. I love going to the annual Soil Water Conservation Society conference and see many of my friends and colleagues over the years whose publications I scavenge for and eat up every time the journals come out to keep my work as fresh and up to date as possible.
We have, I'm not sure what the number is now, but I think it's 7 or 8 PhDs on staff here at AFT, and obviously all of those are folks, many of them have worked in academic institutions. We have several people who are former faculty. We have, at this point, a research director and sort of a researcher director emeritus, both on staff with extensive connections. And over the years, you've heard me talk about some of the very powerful collaborations that we've had that have led to real meaningful impact. The one that jumps in mind right now is a project we did with UC Davis about 3-4 years ago, which allowed us to make the case, the Cap and Trade Authority in California, that protecting farmland was one way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that activity to date has resulted in well over $100 million that have been allocated to farmland protection in California. And we believe that that number is going to grow to $500 million to $500 million within the next 3 years. So AFT has always had a focus on research. We do it in-house, but the nature of research is all about collaboration. So we work extensively with these other institutions. We got another caller on the line, Virginia from Tennessee. Virginia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and I have really, I guess, 2 questions. One is the county I'm in, I have forest land, basically, but neighbors have cattle, dairy farms, and beef cattle. And I'm wondering about advice for cattle farmers, about getting advice on the best way they can deal with this problem of water quality. That's for my own sake. I'd like to know. The other question is, what about any kind of political action? I'm an inveterate letter writer, and I'm happy to write to legislators. And I was saying, if there are letters that are already written, I ordinarily compose letters, but I would be happy to send in something that's already been written that would be cogent. So that's
well,
it.
I'm going to let Michelle answer your first question, and then I'll take a stab at the second, and I'll give Michelle a chance to add to that if she'd like. But you want to talk about what can happen on livestock farms?
Yes.
Help out with water?
Yes, absolutely. My colleague Jacob Gilley in Virginia is leading a grazing-oriented project that is multifaceted. It not only involves trying to quantify the economic and water quality and climate benefits of grazing operations, but also trying to improve the markets for small farmers who are adopting these environmentally sound practices and, many other elements. It's a terrific project, and I hope we'll be getting that online to share with folks like Virginia Virginia who are interested. But one key thing, it goes back to soil health. So whether you're the way that you rotate your cows in a rotational grazing system can have a dramatic improvement in soil health that benefits not only the environment in terms of water quality, but also benefits the climate in terms of soil carbon sequestration and benefits the nutrition for those cows. So grazing, rotational grazing, management intensive grazing, MIG, is one of the acronyms out there that I know your Tennessee land-grant university extension professors will have lots of fact sheets available online for you and other dairy and beef farmers who are eager to improve their soil health and reduce their water pollution.
So let me take a stab at your policy question. AFT has played an active role. You could call it an outsized role, really, for an organization of our small size. We've really had a pretty significant impact on federal agricultural policy. Going back to 1985, when the conservation title was introduced, and it was introduced by a coalition that AFT led. And the white papers, the research that undergirded the conservation title in 1985 were produced right here at AFT. So we've had a long history of active policy engagement. Having said that, we're a relatively small entity. And we rely on a lot of support from other organizations when we do policy work, and we rely on people like you who are willing to write letters and create openings with your congressman and the like. That's the only way, but you have to build sort of a grassroots effort as well as have the research and the policy and the data to support that. It's really a two-pronged approach that works when it comes to policy. Now, having said that, there will be opportunities from time to time for letter writing and engagement, but we're in kind of a trough right now. We just passed less than a year ago the latest farm bill. And farm legislation is a little different from a lot of other legislation in that it is this, what's sometimes referred to as an omnibus bill. Almost everything dealing with agricultural policy is packaged in a single big bill that gets reauthorized, in theory, every 5 years. So we just did it. So that doesn't mean there's going to be nothing that's agricultural that's on the policy radar for 5 years. But it means right now everyone is sort of breathing again after a very intense period. We're focusing on the rulemaking side of implementing. There could be some opportunities there. So sometimes we will send out action alerts around rulemaking, but those are generally highly technical issues and not the things that either engage most members of the public or that they necessarily have the expertise to comment on. But you can stay abreast of our policy work on our website, and we are hoping, we've been making a lot of changes, making a lot of improvements to our communications efforts, we think anyway, in the last couple of years. The next step for us is to really get to the point where we will be asking every member where their interest areas are, and if you identify writing letters and doing those kind of things, we will make sure you get notice every time there's that opportunity. So thank you for the offer. Those things make a difference. I was a state legislator, and granted, being a legislator in a state of the size of Maine is a little different than being a member of the U.S. Congress. But I also worked for a congressman a long time ago, and I can tell you that letters make a difference. They really do. They keep track of them, and they add them up. So I'm glad you're willing to offer help of that sort. We have a lot of other questions, but before we get to them, I really want to flag another issue, which relates directly to these free-range conversations. As I said, we've been doing these for 2.5 years, and it's really cool to connect with thousands of AFT members at the same time in this way. Michelle is nodding. It's
Very
pretty cool,
yep.
isn't it?
Yep.
But the technology that allows us to do something isn't something that we have here in the AFT office. So to call out to thousands of people simultaneously and get them all on the same phone line is complicated, and it is expensive. So we are in the middle of budget time here at AFT, and just yesterday, and this is verbatim truth, just yesterday we were looking at the budget for these free-range conversations and wondering if we could afford to continue them next year. And we feel they're really important, but we don't know exactly how you all feel. Now, there's no free lunch in this world, and we're not in a position to continue calls like this if they're not doing good and we don't have strong support for them. So I have a set of additional polling questions for you. It won't take long. This will be very useful to us to help us understand if these calls are important to you. So the first polling question, I want you to press 1 if this is your first free-range conversation. Press 2 if this is your second or third, and press 3, jumping ahead here, press 3 if you've listened to 4 or more free-range conversations. So again, press 1 if this is your first experience, press 2 if it's your second or third, and press 3 if you've been a regular over the last 2.5 years. Next question. On average, for all of the calls that you have participated in, if you find that they have been very engaging and informative, press 1. If you feel they've only been modestly engaging and informative, press 2. And if you feel they've really been of limited value, and I think if that's the case, you're probably not on the call anymore, but if you are in that category, press 3. So again, if they've been very engaging and informative, press 1. If they've only been modestly engaging and informative, press 2. And if they've had limited value, press 3. I can see the results, and I am. My prediction was correct. There's hardly anyone in category 3. Great to see. And finally, the last polling question we're going to have tonight before we return to more questions. Are you willing to make a financial contribution beyond your usual AFT level of support to help keep these calls going? So if yes, press 1, and if no, we understand that. If no, press 2. We just need to know. This is how we plan what we are doing. So again, press 1 if you're willing to make a financial contribution beyond your usual gift to help support these free-range conversations going forward, and press 2 if you're not. That's great. That's great. Thanks a lot. We may have a chance to share some of these polling. I'll share them right now. We have well over 50% of the people on the call saying they're willing to put in some money. And that is absolutely fantastic.
Sure.
And what it means is I think you'll be invited back sometime, Michelle. I think that's what it means. So let's see if we have any other questions here. All right. We have Joe in Alabama. Joe.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes. My question is simply this. Has AFC done any research or intends to do any research about the viability of placing surge ponds for runoff near agricultural fields along the periphery, the downslope periphery, to maybe collect sediments and nutrients and allow them to slow down during rainfall, collect and then settle, and then subsequently even maybe use this water for irrigation later or to recharge groundwater. In other words, try to keep this from entering our surface waters and winding up in the Gulf of Mexico.
That's terrific. Thank you for that. I have two thoughts on that. One, I really love what you said at the end, reusing that runoff water for irrigation when the farmers need it, not during that precipitation event that didn't capture enough of that that allowed that runoff to happen. And for groundwater recharge, perhaps, I think friends in Arkansas and other southern states that are grappling with that are leading the way on that kind of research to see how cost effective that kind of a recharge solution can be involved. You know, on the first part of it, absolutely. Having edge of field practices that trap runoff and allow sediment to settle, so sediment retention ponds is one word for it, and other practices like wash cobs, water and sediment control basins. These are very important structural practices, but I can tell you what the folks in our Midwest offices tell me, and I learn a lot from them because they're the experts on the ground, is that for too long, we focused on these edge-of-field structural solutions and ignored the important opportunities to save the water and keep it from running off in the first place with these in-field soil health practices, right? So we focused on the Band-Aid to the problem instead of preventing the problem in the first place. And so if we can keep water where it needs to be, keep the nutrients and the manure that we use as nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus in the fields, we'll have less need for those structural edge of field practices. But they do go hand in hand, but we at AFT feel that the emphasis has swung too far in one direction, and we're here leading the charge with many others to focus on the in-field solutions.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it. We've got another caller, David. And David, we're not sure where you're from, but we'd love to hear from you.
I'm from Lower Delaware.
All right.
And that's basically poultry company. I mean, we do a lot of chickens in our area, yes, and indeed. We're flatland, so we don't have a lot of the runoff that other areas have in comparison. But my main, well, I actually got a dual question. My first question naturally would be, why don't we utilize a floating aquatic plant like Lima minor, commonly called duckweed, in our non-navigable streams to collect the nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, utilizing a best management practice concept of, since duckweed floats, utilizing a floating oil boom to go across the stream or drainage ditch or whatever you want to call it, and harvest the biomass on, say, a weekly or biweekly basis, because duckweed during the growing season can double in volume daily. Normally on an acre of area, you can produce a tenfold biomass in compared to soybeans. It has a C protein level of soybeans at 30% or a little above 30%. It also has a starch content of 70+%, so it can be utilized either as a feedstock for ethanol or butanol, or a feed additive for chicken feed, pig feed, fish food, etc., once it's out of the water system. Back in 2012, the University of Delaware, Dr. Brian Tracy did a study, National Science Foundation study. We did basically a pit, 8 foot by 8 foot by 4 foot deep, but 1,900 gallons of water from one of our local ponds.
Yeah, David, let me just...
able to lower the nutrient level of phosphorus to 0 in less than 1 week, and the nitrogen level to 0 in less than 2 weeks. And what I'm wondering is why we don't utilize something like that.
Let me just stop you there for a sec. I think we get the question. I want to hear Michelle's answer. You're basically saying you've got this thing, duckweed, that potentially can help clean the water, and it has value as a product. So, yes. Michelle, talk about that.
Yes, David, I had to look this up. You wrote this question in advance, and to be honest, I had to look it up. And I loved what I heard from you, and I love what I read online. So that's a short way of saying I don't know, but I'm very intrigued. I will look it up, and if you'd like to contact me, you can do so by finding my email online. It sounds like you have some positive things to say about it. And yes, Delaware is very close to my heart. It was one of the 3 states that I studied for my dissertation, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And there's great things going on in Delaware trying to reduce phosphorus runoff in particular, but nitrogen as well as sediment runoff to the Chesapeake Bay and to the Atlantic as well. So kudos to Delaware.
Thanks for your question, David. I apologize to cut you off, but I think we had gotten the essence of it, and I think you following up with Michelle will potentially help us understand some new options that maybe we hadn't thought of. Next caller we have is Inez in Washington State. Hello.
Good evening, John. This is Inez Black. I have a farm on Lopez Island in the San Juan Islands, the state of Washington.
That's a beautiful area.
Thank you. I've been a member of AFT. My husband was a member for many years before he died, so I'm very supportive of what you're doing. Thank you for these wonderful live broadcasts, and I've been listening intently to people all over the country, but I'm going to represent one of the older farmers that is looking for younger farmers that could help take care of the land and that would share my vision. And I'm talking about not just my vision, but many of the people who you have online now or who could become older farmers who would like to have younger farmers who share the same vision, which is using good soil health practices, which you've already mentioned and which I have been practicing in the last 10 years, specifically in my land and crop rotation and such. And I'd like to be able to find younger farmers who would have that same vision, who could see that by using these good soil health practices, that in the long term, that farmer that would be helping me as an older farmer would actually get some long-term economic benefit, rather than the past where a tenant farmer will come in and take the crop, say hay, off the field and not fertilize, but just take, and that would help feed their animals, right? But it's certainly not helping my land. And doing it year after year, and I know that, the land becomes less and less valuable. The nutrients are lost. And so I'm really concerned how AFT could help in this process of finding people who would share that vision.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And, you know, we sometimes say that we really have three thrusts to our work. It's about the land itself, it's about the practices on the land, and it's about the people who steward the land. And as important as the land is, as important as the practices are, nothing is going to happen if you don't have the right people to steward and work the land. So you're hitting on a great question. Now, you guys can't see it because this is over the phone, but Michelle passed a little note to me saying, you take this one. So that's why I'm talking, not Michelle. Or you're going to hear Michelle Morris before the night's over. But I have two thoughts. First, you've jumped to a solution which may be the perfect solution, which is how do you get the right new operator on the farm. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But you also hinted at something else. You talked about if you can't be farming it and you're leasing it to someone, they are potentially using it in a way that doesn't follow best practices and that isn't really restoring the soil or treating it well. That does not have to be the case. You asked what AFT is doing. One of the things we do is we work with non-operating landowners, people who are not themselves the farmer but who own the land. In fact, we have a whole program that's focused on women non-operating landowners because, sadly, a lot of the conservation programs that exist, they're hard to crack the nut to understand it. And it's a bit of an old boys network in some circles out there. So we focus specifically on women non-operating landowners and give them the information and tools so that they can make sure they have lease agreements with their farmers who will do what's right by the land. And this program, which we call Women for the Land, has been extremely successful. In our last analysis, 73% of the women who have participated have been able to affect positive conservation practices on their land. So that's one answer to your question. It doesn't only need a whole new operator who you're passing the farm on to in order for it to be well managed. But in many cases, a really good strategy is to transition the farm to a new operator. And in my mind, I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but I hope you understand why. We talk a lot about the need for better farming practices at AFT. We've been in this space for close to 40 years, and we've had case studies in the past, the kind of case studies that Michelle is just released recently, all other information that show this is the right thing to do, and yet we don't have nearly the adoption of these kind of forward-looking, environmentally sound, climate-smart, regenerative, whatever you want to call it, practices at the level that is needed to heal our planet. Why? There's a lot of answers, and that's an hour-long conversation, but part of it is if you're a 60-year-old farmer, you think you're 5 years away from retirement, and this is not time to change. Now, in reality, that 60-year-old farmer ends up farming for the next 20 years, but at any given year, they think they're going to be out another 3, 4, 5 years. The key, one of the keys to new farming practices and broader adoption is bringing on the next generation of farmers. And there are so many young people who want to farm. The barrier is often the cost of that land. So protecting the farm with an easement, lowering the cost, looking at other strategies to lower that cost, providing services so those farmers can get access to financing. They know what they're doing from day one, so they don't have a few bad years before they have good years. And AFT is directly involved in that space. In fact, on many levels, we do it nationally, and we do it in some regions in depth. And nationally, we have developed and now provide educational resources across the country to different organizations that are working on these land access and next generation issues. We actually certify nonprofit professionals to make sure they have the tools they need to help the next generation of farmers. And in fact, we are launching a program like this in Washington State, where you are, this coming year. We also have our own on-the-ground expertise. In New York, for instance, we run what I would call the best farmland program in the country that is linked to a whole range of services provided by Cornell and other ag groups to make sure that beginning farmers have the tools they need to be successful. But this is so important. Our research has shown that somewhere in the neighborhood of 380 million acres of farmland in this country will change hands in the next 15 years due simply to the age of farmland owners. And you can look at that as a serious challenge. We do. You can also look at it as a huge opportunity, because if we can reduce the barriers and get the right people on that land, we don't only solve the farmer shortage problem, we go a long way to getting much broader adoption of better conservation practices. Anything to add?
That was terrific.
Okay. We got another question. This one we will let you take, Michelle. We have Kathleen from North Carolina.
Hi. I'm a water resources grad student at Duke, and I'm curious as to how you are measuring the outcomes in the water quality, and as well as who is measuring them.
Terrific question, Kathleen. Thank you. Outcomes quantification is near and dear to my heart, so I'm glad to hear that you're pursuing it too, sounds like. I'll take one example. In our Illinois Upper Macoupin Creek Watershed Project that our folks in Illinois lead so well, we are doing several things to measure environmental, social, and economic outcomes. On the environmental front, it is a water quality oriented project, and we've aligned our goals with the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy to achieve a 25% reduction in phosphorus and a 17% reduction in nitrogen. And we're going to measure that with in-stream monitoring in partnership with USGS, that's the U.S. Geological Survey, with the Illinois branch, that goes out and collects samples for us and analyzes them, as well as a local college, Blackburn University. So students are also doing grab sampling at the subwatershed level and in partnership with Illinois EPA. On the other hand, we know that it will take quite some time due to the natural lag in how the land responds to these practices and then how the water responds to these practices. So we can't hold our breath. We've developed an amazing watershed scale model called the Swam Model that is helping us do a variety of things. First, it's geographically targeting for us the highest priority fields with disproportionately large phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment losses, so that we can approach farmers and operators and landowners with that information and ask them to engage in partnership with us to try to figure out what to do about it. The second thing this watershed model does, it helps us track the practice adoptions and converts practices into pounds of phosphorus, pounds of nitrogen, and tons of sediment, so we can track our goals that way. I'm probably going on too technically here, John, but we've got a researcher on the line.
Love quantification of outcomes.
And so just quickly on the social outcomes, we do entry and exit surveys. We're advised by sociologists and anthropologists on how to write these questions and how to crunch the statistics. And we're with the help of economists, we're trying to figure out simple, discrete economic questions to measure the effectiveness of our practices.
And I just have to tell Michelle at the end of this by saying she has been a major force nationally in trying to get USDA to think about the outcomes of their programs rather than just outlining a program, do this, do that. Let's worry about what the outcomes really are. And her research is nationally significant for advancing this field, and where all of agriculture and the planet are better off because of it. We, unfortunately, are running out of time. I know there's a few more questions there, but there's no reason why we cannot have those questions answered by email later. I can easily say that because it won't be me doing it. It will be Michelle. I want to thank Michelle tonight for her time and for all she does for AFT and for our farmers and for our planet. So thanks, Michelle. Any final thoughts?
Thank you, John. This was a pleasure. And thank you to all the listeners who joined us tonight. Thank you for allowing me to share the great work that so many of our staff in our regional offices, our climate office, our Women for the Land policy team, and our federal policy team are just so passionate about. We try to find solutions that work for farmers and work for water quality. And this, the support and the interest that these AFT members on the phone and on the computer are showing us, it just really inspires us to work even harder to achieve the water quality outcomes that we, the farmers and the non-farmers alike, we all deserve.
Well, I thank you, Michelle. I thank all the AFT members who are on the phone. AFT is doing some critically important work, and it's only possible because of your ongoing support. So remember, no farms, no food, no future. Or as I like to say it, farming is our future. Good night, everyone. No farms, no food, no future. Or as I like to say it, farming is our future. Good night, everyone. No farms, no food, no future. Or as I like to say it, farming is our future. Good night, everyone. No farms, no food, no future. Or as I like to say it, farming